Today, we are going to showcase the deck that I have built utilizing Admiral Piett Green with the highest cost cards that exist in this game, hopefully playable in this deck. HARK, we are here with another deck build for Star Wars Unlimited. This is a casual deck. This is not going to be effective in any form of competitive, so do not take it to think that you're going to do well. You might be able to catch a couple people by surprise, but this deck gets picked apart at even the smallest amount of efficiency. But it should be fun to play if you can get the pieces of it together, the Exodia as it were, to be able to eliminate your opponents. So shout out to Michael Stringham 6252 for the suggestion of making a Piett deck. I'm not a huge fan of Piett as a whole. There are a couple of fun plays that he has that he has access to that are quite good, but the way that I would want to play him, which is this deck that you'll see here in just a minute, is not viable in the grand scheme of Star Wars Unlimited. So without any further ado, let's check out Admiral Piett Data Vault. Now, could I make a more competitive Piett deck? Sure. With the loss of TDR, Triple Dark Raid, I don't know that there is any competitive format that Admiral Piett could survive in. But instead of making the most efficient, best play possible deck for Admiral Piett, we're making something here that has a couple of different ways to beat the opponents on high turns, but also provides you with an opportunity to maybe stick the game out in the early game long enough to get to at least the mid-game portion of clearing out your opponent's board and then flipping into something that's going to absolutely decimate your opponent should you be able to get there. So we are playing a double green deck, Admiral Piett Data Vault. We're not playing too many, if any. We're playing one double green card in a playset copy, and there's a reason for that, which we'll describe at the end here. But we're starting off with 3 dogfights. You do want to be able to take out your opponent's units. You can use your own units to do so. You're not worried too much in the early game of doing damage to your opponent's base. Dogfight's going to allow you to take your units and double attack on turns that they can attack, utilizing its effect for just 1 resource, which is pretty good. 2 copies of Admiral Piett. This deck eventually will drop a bunch of large units onto the board, and being able to ambush with them to clear out your opponent's units in the process of doing that is quite good. Only 2 copies though, because we don't want to see a bunch of these early. We just want to see one either we can resource for a later purpose, or one we can pick up later once we start dropping the bigger ships. 3 copies of Colonel Yularen. It's the healing. It's going to be able to get you. You're playing all green units, so you don't have to worry about any other weird restrictions with them. Every time you play a green unit, including Yularen, you get to be able to heal 1 damage off your base. With 33 health, you can potentially survive a much longer time than normal. We have 2 copies of the Gamorrean Retainer. We're using this as an early game Sentinel. If you can play the Retainer on 2, and then any other green unit on 3, you have a 3/2 Sentinel that your opponent has to attack into, which is pretty good. We have Cobb Vanth here, 3 copies. This is really good because it does allow you to play some of these 2-cost units with the flip that Cobb Vanth does have, which is very handy. We have 3 copies of the Emperor's Royal Guard, 3 copies of Outlaw Corona, 3 copies of Praetorian Guard, and 3 copies of Super Laser Technician. Sentinel, early game attacks. Everybody knows Piett can cheat out that Outlaw Corona for 2 into space. A 3/5 allowing you to be able to blow up your opponent's units in space is pretty good. And then the 2 Sentinels from the Guard type units. And then we have the resource ramp with the Super Laser Technician and the resupply. 3 copies of Dornian Gunship. We'll get to this one later. 3 copies of Overwhelming Barrage. Obvious card is obvious. 3 copies of Gladiator Star Destroyer. This is where we can start stabilizing in our mid game, where we can drop the Star Destroyer, either give it self-sentinel if you stop space, or give something else sentinel that's on the ground if you do have a larger unit that's out there, in order to be able to just stop and hold off your opponent's units from being able to kill you. 3 copies of the Pirate Battle Tank, a couple different purposes here. It is a 6-cost 4/6 Sentinel, so it serves that same purpose as the Gladiator Star Destroyer, but it can smuggle for 7, so you can resource it early, utilize it, and then dump it later on. Resupply Carrier, yet another ramp resource for your ability to get good stuff done with the resupply carrier. 2 copies of Turbo Laser Salvo. You're going to have a unit that's going to be able to do a lot of damage to your opponent's units. Turbo Laser Salvo, 2 copies of those is going to be able to clear the ground or space arenas depending on what you have, and that should be pretty helpful. 3 Architans Assault Cruisers. Being able to ambush, destroy one of your opponent's units, and then take it as a resource is going to be very important for your strategy later on. 2 copies of Reinforcement Walker. Again, being able to just get that extra health onto your base. There are more options in green to be able to heal and do things like that, but between Yularen and the Reinforcement Walker and your Sentinels, I think it should be enough. We're getting into now the biggest ships that we have access to. 1 Relentless, 2 Devastators, 1 Executor, 1 Finalizer, and 2 Supremacy. The reason why we're going with a bunch of one-offs is because we don't want to get stuck with a whole large amount of ships. And on top of that, we actually want most of these to go into our resource row. The reason why there's 2 Devastators and 2 Supremacies is because the Devastator is a great ship that we want to have in our hand for the 10 drop, because it's a Sentinel, it blows up a ground unit, it does a lot of good things for you, and it overwhelms so you can start pushing that damage to your opponent's base. And then the Supremacy also has Ambush, which means it can destroy an enemy unit, and all of your vehicle units get +6/+6. And we do have quite a few vehicles in here. And then the last card here, the key piece of our strategy here, is Endless Legions. 14 cost, double green, very rare play. Pretty much Yoda decks are the only ones that play this to be able to dong something for 14 damage with its effect. But we're actually using it for its intended purpose here of being able to flip cards from our resource row to be able to blow up our opponent. And we need 14 cards in the resource row that are units we can play with the Endless Legions. I understand that that's difficult with cards like Resupply, which only put itself and don't flip with Endless Legions, and Super Laser Technician isn't the greatest thing to drop from an Endless Legions, but something like Resupply Carrier, taking the top card of your deck, could put whatever in there, and you're just hoping that it's going to be a unit that's useful. That's why we have the Smuggle Sentinel with the Pirate Battle Tank, because at least it serves a double purpose, and then we have lots of copies of these other cards that can potentially come out and do a lot of damage. So it's a lot of early game support, Sentinel, kind of just try to shore up your defenses in the ground arena and potentially the space arena with the Star Destroyer, and then mid game start whittling down your opponent's units, so that way when you drop the Endless Legions, you can actually eliminate your opponent in one fell swoop. There is an opportunity to play Galactic Ambition in here, but because of the fact that it does cost you a ton of resources, and there's only a couple of cards here, either the Finalizer or the Devastator, that will really switch you into being able to do that without building a full space deck to support the Supremacy, it wasn't valuable enough to me to say, hey, this is worth doing and this is worth playing in this instance. So your goal here is to defend, survive, play your big ships in your resource row, and then flip Endless Legion so you can bring out all of these big ships one at a time that are able to set a board presence, Sentinels on the ground, Sentinels in space, lots of vehicles, but the ultimate play is the Dornian gunship. And the reason why this exists in this deck is when played, deal indirect damage to a player equal to the number of vehicle units you control. Could we go full vehicle in this deck? We sure can. It's not good. So we're trying to shore up the early game with our defensive units. That's why they're mostly in the low cost, but also having enough vehicles that we can throw them into our resource row, so that when we flip into the Endless Legions on 14, the 14 resource turn, if you can get there, which you should be able to with all of the ramping that you're doing with the Super Laser Tech Resupply and the Resupply Carrier, you can potentially start flipping a Relentless, a Devastator, an Executor, a Finalizer, a Supremacy, an Architans, a Reinforcement Walker, a Resupply Carrier, the Gladiator Star Destroyer, Outlaw Coronas, Pirate Battle Tank. Whatever we end up doing, the maximum amount of damage we could potentially do with this is going to be 12, 13, and 14 respectively, depending on how many vehicles we stuck into our resource row and potentially how many things are already on the board as it is. You're likely not going to get the maximum amount, but if you can trigger at least, let's say, 9 damage from the Dornian gunship, which will turn into 10 and 11 on the successive Dornians afterwards, you can end up ruining your opponent's board or just beating them on the spot if they don't have enough units on the board to soak up the indirect damage that the Dornians are doing. So your Dornians are always going to be resource targets. There are going to be very, very, very few instances that you want to actually put this on the board. And the only one I can really think of is if you desperately need a ground Sentinel with your Praetorian Guard and you need that 4 power on the board to be able to turn the Sentinel on. This is a deck that should be fun to play. It's always one of those big green style decks that you'll see in other games that can potentially get to the late game with the deck and start stomping on your opponent's units. If you can flip that incredible turn, your opponent effectively loses on the spot unless they have a way to bypass the Sentinels that you're putting onto the board and have enough damage to finish you off, which is why we run Data Vault, for more options in your deck to be able to stop your opponent from doing what they want to do in their game, but also the extra health to make it so you can survive. Piett is helping you with his ability to play capital ships for 1 less on the leader side, 2 less on the unit side. But again, the goal isn't necessarily Piett's ability to get capital ships onto the field outside of the Outlaw Corona. It's to provide you an option to be able to really get that Endless Legions going and absolutely mess up your opponent. And if you can get all these vehicles onto the board and your opponent somehow survives, and you were also able to drop the Supremacy as part of this, you now have a bunch of vehicles that are also +6/+6. This is a weird strategy. It's probably, again, not something you're going to get off a bunch, but when you do, your opponent is just going to be like, I have no idea what to do. Because realistically, they're not going to know what to do. You're not going to have any resources after that, or very few, especially if you're not using things like resupply. And if you are, then you'll have a few resources available. So make sure you can kill your opponent when you do this, which requires you to pay attention to your resource row. This is not the best way to play this deck, but this is probably the most fun way to play this thing. And on top of that, if the first card you play is your Admiral Piett, and then all of your other vehicles are these things, you can start ambushing him to eliminate your opponent's units to be able to set up those Dornian gunships coming out at the last cards that you play with Endless Legions. Fun, funky deck. This is actually something I might try once the GC season is finished, just to see if I can get it to go, get it to do something dumb. But the game should be fun. I think this is going to be a fun thing, but again, not competitive and does not mesh well with the competitive mindset, because this is very easy to bypass if your opponent is able to play to the best of their ability. There's only so much you can do in a double green deck to be able to get this off. But you know what? Imagine a fleet of Star Destroyers coming out of hyperspace and then Dornians just donking you left and right. What are you going to do, right? So there you have it. That's what we have for this Piett deck against... Shout out to Michael Stringham. Thank you very much for the suggestion to pop out a Piett deck here. I might do a follow-up that does some other colors, but honestly, I don't really see Piett as a leader that is viable even in the mid-range of the game below the competitive. I've talked before about how the difference between competitive and casual is like the difference between a tier 1 deck and a tier 4 deck. It's just a completely separate game being played by people who are not playing at the highest level of efficiency and card play when it comes to the competitive aspect of the game. That's why I don't really bring out my Spectre deck, because it's not the most efficient thing and it gets blown out by even the smallest amount of efficiency built into a deck. That's why I do have to try to build a competitive deck that actually has a way of being able to beat my opponents in each game. Even if I don't win every matchup, it has to have a game plan in every matchup, because that is how the game is played. If you're at a kitchen table and there's not necessarily a no comp, no meta rule, but you have the mindset of people who are like, I just want to play fun Star Wars cards, this deck is going to be perfect for you, because it's going to do dumb Star Wars card things. And that's what the games really realistically should be about. That support needs to be in the game more than it is now. And until the larger community agrees that you don't need to bring out the haymakers, you don't need to bring out the nukes, the cruise missiles, the tomahawks, every single local, then maybe we can start actually having fun with Star Wars in Star Wars Unlimited. But there you have it. That's the deck. Thank you once again to everybody out there watching. Like this video, comment down below what your favorite part of this deck, what you would potentially change, add in, take out, whatever the case may be, to make this deck a little bit more viable or make this deck a little bit more fun. I'd be interested in hearing your comments on that subject. Subscribe to the Star Wars Unlimited channel for all of your Star Wars Unlimited needs. I am again RybackStun. You are my amazing audience. Thank you for joining me, folks. We'll see you in the next one, and I will see you in the stars.